Hello. This is the last installment of the process improvement methodology, DMAIC, and we are now in the control phase, which by most account is the most difficult because it involves changing the culture of the organization. When you're in a process improvement mode, you've got a team, you've got a support structure, you've got resources. At some point, you got to give the process back to the people who operate it day in and day out. And you need to maintain the changes and keep improving. That is culture change. So, the concepts I'll be looking at today: the control dashboard, adjacent processes, control loop, the learning loop, critical notions here, the control loop and the learning loop, notion of process owner, the owner's manual, and service level agreement I'll touch upon briefly. Not a very technical video. I'll mention again statistical process control, Poka-Yoki's, and the control form. We are here. This is the landing of the improvement drive. And we are here in terms of this input-output sequence, where at the outset of the improvement phase, you have you've proven the concept. You've got a validated process that works. You've demonstrated it. And what you need is an implemented, stable, and capable process on a path to continuous improvement. Let's first try to situate processes, take a systems view of processes, and understand the feedback response, feedback control loop, and the learning loop. The example I'll use, a metaphor. Imagine that you live in Canada and you just bought a new house, brand new. You walk in, and we have here, if you're not from Canada, we have big changes in weather, of course, between July 15, where you could get 33, 34 degree, very humid, to January 15, where you may get 25 below, very dry here. Or if you're in Montreal, it could be wet as well, depending on the days. With the change of seasons, the metaphor I want to use is you're trying to maintain a comfortable climate, comfortable environment in the house. With all these changes going on outside, you are controlling three processes to try to maintain home comfort. You are controlling heat exchange. There is a system, which you certainly know, that takes in air from outside and pumps out old air from inside. This has all sorts of effects in terms of sucking in either cold or hot, and humidity as well. Could be water could be coming in. So you've got an input-output. Humidify air. When it gets very dry, we have a system whereby you put in some water in the heating system so that you increase the water content of the air, humidity. You can stop that as well. You control that as well. Input-output and heat. Whoops, there should be an H here. Produce heat. So you've got, of course, a furnace that takes in energy and produces heat. Three processes closely interrelated. They are processes with input-output, each of them. They exist, of course, in an internal home environment, such as factors like cooking, deodorants that you put in the air, animals that will have their impact. If you have a party in the house, injection of clear cold, well, if you have a party in the house, depending on the number of people you have in the house, if the house is vacant for several days, the showers that you take, the dishwashing machine will throw all sorts of variables into the process. This environment exists, as I just said, in the outside environment. The wind, the rain, the snow, the pressure, Sun rays, of course, the second floor tends to be warmer, especially in the afternoons. But then there are more windows in my house here, so in this case I get more cold air through the windows. So you've got environments to take into consideration. Processes do not take place in a vacuum. They exist within an internal environment, immediate environment, and external environment. Those, by the way, are characterized by what we call the PEST: political, environmental, social, technological, economical environments that exist in any processes. Those change, you've got to adjust your process consequently. This systems model measures two things: humidity, temperature. Two gauges, and hopefully you'd have more measured than two, but you could have at least two places where you measure those. You get instruments that gives you readings, and that's an input into a process control, meaning is it too hot in here? Is it too humid in here? Is it a combination of both? And then you discuss with other people in the house, and you decide to go and change the setting. That is the control part. You get feedback from the indicators, from your personal body feeling as well. Different people, different feelings, different systems. You process that information, you take a decision to adjust the controls, and of course it takes a while before the control changes you've made will take place. So if you don't wait long enough, you go back again, you change it again, and you get more of the effect, and when it comes in, then it's too much. So you go back and you really change because it's really too hot right now. And you've got these boom and bust. That's typical of many systems. Let's call this, and as I move on, I will refer to this as the feedback and control system. That's the first loop. The second loop is that every time that you do this, you learn. You learn that if you wait 5 more minutes when it feels a little hot, a little damp, and if you change first the setting of the humidity, then you wait 5, then you change the set. In other words, you learn to control the process better if you're attentive, if you make connections, change one variable, observe, correlate, action, effect, and then learn. So in fact, you are in position to improve your process control. Gradually. Feedback and control loop. The other loop is the learning loop. Here. Process information, correct, improve the next time around. So process controllers got 2 jobs to do. Control the process, correct it, try to keep it within parameter, within the voice of the customer. And at the same time, learn. But learning requires some rigor. Make inference based on statistical thinking. Just, I think this had this effect, so I will. That's messing with the process. You have to be rigorous, and statistical thinking is the foundation of that. In other words, if you do that, moving from one version to the other, instead of going down from the moment the performance of the process over time could easily go down. From the moment you've improved it, what you would like, of course, is rather go up that slope through various iteration 1, 2, 3. You have the control loops, feedback and control, as I just illustrated. And you've got the learning loop. You could call that the improvement loop as well. Many organizations do not do this. They do not improve from one to the other, and in fact they are following that slope as they move on to another fire. Put out the fire, move on, forget about it, and slowly the solutions that you've put in place are fading. The environment change. You don't change the process, you're focused totally somewhere else. Attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder is what we suffer from in many, many organizations. At some point, you will want, when the process has stabilized, you'll want to standardize it. And that includes at time putting in a workflow, for example, with alarms, getting people You owe me this at this time and you're late by click. A workflow system making one-on-one commitment between people when the process is stabilized, and document the process as well. I'll come back to that. Let's take a more complex environment. This is a pharmacy, and I took 4 processes from a typical drugstore here. Fulfill prescription, prepare sterile products. Those are, for example, the syringe that will go directly in the patient's arm. Prepare medication organizers. Those are the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday pill organizers. Pick up prescriptions and deliver medications. I just picked 4 processes which we could all do a SciTalk with, input, output, provider. The environment of the pharmacy includes a number of variables, pharmacist fatigue, computer system flaws, spatial constraint. They're pretty tight back there in many pharmacies. Personal relationship, computer hardware as well, printer problem, formal relation. Anyway, you've got an internal environment, and the pharmacy operates within a global environment as well, where, for example, new information on given medication and problem with medication, new medication comes on, the environment outside, the cost of medication change. We have here in Canada scarcity of pharmacists as well. The noise environment is not conducive to good decision and good thinking. A critical job of the pharmacist is to try and detect interaction, negative interaction between medication prescribed by different professionals independently. So you got to think, contrary to popular belief here. So this is quite parallel to my own example of previously. And if you take one of those, if you zoom in to one of those processes, a fulfill prescription, for example, there you go, then you get a process map with, as you know, the pharmacist, as I showed previously, the various technicians, the doctor himself, with the time it takes, the waiting periods, the decisions, and so on. And the process control here is what and where are you going to measure, who's going to measure, how, what's he going to do, what's he or she going to do with the data, and what action is he going to take to correct the process. So where do you measure? What's the feedback? From that process here, what's the feedback? What are you comparing the values that you're observing to? What are the standards exactly? You're observing a number, for example, the number of people in the waiting room, the number of red baskets, those are urgent baskets, the number of red baskets. What do you compare this to? The number of defects in the billing process, in the cashier process at the end. You compare these values to standards. 0 defect, no more than 3 defects per 1,000 prescription, for defect involving time loss only. Time loss, now that's not health consequence, of course. Average service time of 20 minutes, and so on. You compare the readings that you get from the process to standards, and on the basis, and that would be here the voice of the customer, you are getting the voice of the process here, comparing, taking action to control and adjust the process, which may involve things like change a senior technician that's working in the back room, take him up front. Same thing for a pharmacist. Call an extra tech, an extra pharmacist. Move the green baskets, not urgent, off the line for a moment. All these actions are decided by the pharmacist controlling the process. And as she's doing that, she should also be observing cause and effect and consequence, and deciding what's the best measure to take when I observe a given situation, a given set of variable value, if you like. This is the red line that I had in the previous slide. The blue line is make conclusion for improvement for the next value of the process. Of course, if I take, again, fill prescription, I should take into account that this process does not exist in a vacuum. There are other processes closely interconnected to it. For example, prioritize work, deliver medication, give advice to the patient, manage inventory, load new medication in the system, and so on. Some of those are closely intertwined. And as you implement a new process, you should closely look at those interfaces. And process owners of various processes should get together and discuss who gives what to whom. What is the commitment of whom to whom? Making a commitment involves clearly specifying this is what we'll give you. Having the customer process understand that this is what he'll be receiving. Specifying how they're going to measure it. What will be the consequence? Positive, negative, but significant for both. And handshake on it. Deal. We call this a service level agreement. They work when they are negotiated, real options, negotiated. We discuss. You want this? Why? Okay, we can do this. We discuss your need, my need. Of course, this process got a downstream customer. Upstream, he's got a supplier process. We discuss openly. We agree. We agree on how we're going to measure it specifically, and we make the results visual and visible throughout the organization. And then everyone is able to monitor the interface, monitor the fulfillment of the need of this process. Because this team here cannot commit to their own customer unless their own internal provider, service provider, have not committed to them. Service level agreement. The measurements could look something like this, and I took this from my personal data. This is a process dashboard. In this case, it is my health dashboard where I measure my weight, my hours of training per week. This is 10 years data. My cholesterol ratio, my blood pressure, and so on. A process dashboard is information on variation on important variables that over time you learn to fit within the voice of the customer. My blood pressure should be 75, the systole should be below 75. I've got a target weight of about 155, 56 pounds. Sorry about that, to be about 72 kilos, I guess. I measure variation once every 2 weeks, something like that. That's enough. If you're not in close control, that's enough. And you use a little statistical thinking to detect trends and to learn the correlation between doing something and having a specific consequence, desirable or not. An alternative to measurement is having fail-safe devices, mechanisms that will always ensure that things go on the way you want them to go on. Pokayukis, in other words. If you don't want to forget your cell phone, of course you put it in your shoe. Not rocket science, but it works. Once you've understood the vulnerable points of your process, many places, a little thinking will let a team figure out simple ways to systematically, oftentimes 100%, avoid some problems. If you've got a fail-safe device, you don't have to measure it. It's done every time, the first time correctly. That's, of course, is the easiest way to do things. And of course, once the process has stabilized, you have to document this process. Process documentation does not mean describing in detail everything that you do, because it's not all critical, many of which is optional anyway. It's a process description is describing what's critical. And in the analyze phase, you've seen the CTP, critical to process identification. What's critical? It's got to be done that way, otherwise it fails. The rest, let people use their intelligence. If you treat people like children, they will act like children. So let people do things that are optional the way they want. But the critical thing, do describe. You cannot improve a process that you do not know. So describe the process, the vital parts, in detail, and that will be, of course, very useful as well when you make changes. You have somewhere to go to change that process formally, and when you introduce new people to the process, make sure that they understand. By the way, a good process documentation should have various levels: beginner, intermediate, advanced. We have this bad habit of throwing someone into an advanced level thing. He only needs to do the basic. So photos, also videos, that's a YouTube, not on YouTube per se, but this type of video, especially with young people nowadays, will do wonders, rather than longhand descriptions using words that they don't always understand. Finally, a simple tool here. Whenever you've decided that you're going to measure something, that you have to measure something, what exactly do we have to measure? How are we going to measure it? Who, when, how much, frequency, quantities, timing. Who is responsible for corrective action? And what are his decision rules? That's the feedback and control loop, the red line that I had. And who is responsible for learning from this information and improving the process? That's the blue line as well. All too often forgotten. Fabulous opportunity to learn from your mistakes. But unless it is planned for, it will not take place. And most of the time, great lessons are lost forever and relearned painfully later on. In short then, let me get out of the way here. The biggest challenge in process improvement starts on the day after. A follow-up structure built around a process owner is required to ensure appropriate follow-through and control, with a D on end. Sorry about that. Without a well-designed information system, the process owner and his team will be powerless, at best, and quite possibly a hindrance to process improvement because they will mess with the process. Appropriate interpretation and use of this information requires statistical thinking, science of the unknown. A process exists with an S, within internal and external environments: political, economical, social, technological, environmental. A good understanding of these environments is essential for process control. Processes in an organization are closely intertwined. Any change in one process must consider the impacts in adjacent processes. Service level agreements are a very good way to ensure a clear and solid chain of commitments. When the process is implemented and functioning at the desired performance level, it has to be documented, the owner's manual. It is critical for training and continuous improvement. And that ends the last video of the process improvement series. Thank you for your attention.